literature and post-colonialism, and his papers that he wrote are being published nationally and internationally. And in 2003, he was also awarded the very prestigious 100 Influential Teachers Mentors in Calcutta by the Hindustan Times. Professor Mondal delivered lectures extensively in national and international seminars on various academic topics and also acted as resource persons. With that, I welcome Dr. Ashim Mondal to take the stage from here, and I will be here as host if I'm being needed. So looking forward to a very enriching discussion on the topic, and welcome all of the other delegates today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ankurna, for this nice introduction. This is just a simple correction that I'm yet to be awarded a PhD from Calcutta University. It's almost done, so that's why it's a just a correction. So I think in this session, this is I'm actually welcoming all the participants here, the paper presenters, Ankona here, and also the organizing committee. And I heartily welcome all the uh, viewers here on YouTube channel and also in the Zoom platform. Okay, so in this session, there will be four paper presenters. Uh, I just call their name Ronit Rai, Orijit Mukherjee, Samrat Sengupta, and Shayan Mukherjee. They are all teachers based in Calcutta and around Calcutta. And now, we are actually in a situation, the pandemic situation, we are precariously placed. Our life is almost in a standstill position. We are not able to connect people physically, and we are here all in a virtual mode, virtual platform. Uh, so the people like us and the people like you, uh, okay, so people like you, we are actually we don't know the academic situation, how the academic situation is heading towards, and where we are actually leading to us. So we don't know the situation, but think is that we are very concerned about the COVID pandemic. The poses very strong questions regarding nature and the eco-critical study. That is very important study nowadays. Uh, so first paper presenter, I won't take much time. So I just introduce the first paper presenter here. Uh, who will present the first paper? Orijit or Shayan?
It will be me. It will be me, Orijit.
Orijit Mukherjee. So Orijit Mukherjee. Uh, Orijit is in the academics, in the teaching career. He is teaching. He started his teaching career in uh, Basundari Devi College in the PG section. Uh, he had completed his masters from Presidency College. At that time, it was a Presidency College affiliated to University of Calcutta. In 2011, he had completed his MPhil in 2013. qualified in NET. He had worked in several institutions since then as guest lecturer in Calcutta and also in and around Calcutta. He had worked as CWTT, that is once again the uh, contractual full-time teacher in Basanti Devi College, and he was the coordinator of that particular department. So, and it was from 2013 to 2017, and he also taught in the very formation of Diamond Harbour Women's University. Uh, he taught there. He is presently working as an assistant professor in the Department of English, Behala College, Calcutta. So I would like to um, call Orijit Mukherjee on this platform to deliver his papers. So I would request all the presenters to maintain the time and strictly uh, maintain the time frame, and so that they can complete their papers. And after that, we can open the session to the audience for questions. I would like to make this session very, very interactive one. Okay, so floor is yours, Orijit.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mondal, for such a kind introduction. And before I begin my paper, I would like to congratulate New Literaria, the whole team, for organizing such a brilliant academic endeavor. Today, as you can see, the title of my paper is Disaster Time and Human Condition, Surviving the Cyclones During COVID Pandemic in the Sundarbans. Before I enter into the premise of my paper, I'd just like to give an overview what I'm trying to attempt here, looking at or considering the theme of this conference. We are all living in a post-pandemic, or the pandemic is still continuing. We'll have to think of the future in the post-pandemic situation. And this conference attempts to look at that vis-a-vis the aspect of cultural studies within the limits of various nation states. Here, when we are talking about the idea of nation state and the premise of cultural studies, my paper would obviously focus on the problems and the various aspects of life in the Sundarbans. But apart from that, I would also like to focus on the fact that as this conference is attempting to look at the future in a post-pandemic world, where this aspect of cultural studies may go in future. So I would like to now enter into the basic premise of my paper. Now, before I start the paper, I will stop sharing for a moment. When it is needed, I will once again share the slides as and when required. Now, before I begin, I would just like to set up a very fundamental theoretical premise. The term culture is loaded with plethora of meanings, as we know. And when we attempt to study a culture, it can simultaneously be a text, an event, a revolution, and so on and so forth. These are further complicated by the political, social, economic, and other correlated conditions. Post-colonial and postmodern studies have attempted enough to go beyond the dominant hegemonic narratives and look further into the multiplicity of culture and possibility of their studies. So is the same, or so is it when it comes to the study of nation states. The modern idea of nation, as it has been enough debated, is not natural. As Ernest Gendler would argue, that nations are not inscribed into the nature of things. He would say that nations are something rather new in history. Antiquity did not know them. He would go on to say that in our days, a yet greater error is committed. One confounds the idea of race with that of the nation and attributes to ethnographic or rather linguistic groups a sovereignty analogous to that of actually existing people. We know how Benedict Anderson had developed the idea of nation as a political community with a deep horizontal comradeship. And this idea has already been contested by post-colonial thinkers and historians. Timothy Brennan, in his essay, The National Longing for Form, claims that the idea of nation actually refers both to the modern nation state and to something more ancient, which is natio, which he terms as natio, a local community, domicile, family, a condition of belonging. So beyond the political, as claimed by Anderson, there is also an idea of belonging and collectivity, a mutual sense of community that a group of individuals imagines it shares. Eric Hobsbawm claims that the idea of nation depends upon the invention and repetition of traditions, which help concord the unique sense of a shared history and common origin of people. Now, why am I laying this premise, which is much known, which we do not need to discuss at this point of time? But I would like to draw the world's attention towards Sundarbans. And I would like to say that Sundarbans would mean, as you all know, parts of India and mostly Bangladesh. It's like 40-60. Now, it comes under the rules and laws of these two nations. And from now on, when I refer to Sundarbans, it would be the Indian Sundarbans, because this is the area in which I have worked till now. I have the wish to work in the Bangladesh area too. Now, let us look at the COVID situation and the Sundarbans. Now, India implemented its first lockdown on 24th March 2020. Cyclone Amphan formed on 16th May 2020 and dissipated on 20th May 2020, while India was going through phases of lockdown with its regulations strictly implemented. Now, when we look at this, we have to think of the COVID protocols and the problems that the Sundarbans may face, or Sundarbans have been facing during the pandemic. As we have seen, the Met departments had warned Sundarbans about the Amphan, the cyclone Amphan impending. But as the warning was given by the Met departments, people were forced to drop down their guards against the coronavirus, and the people were flocking together to make embankment repairments, gathering the little they wished to protect, and went to the cyclone centers where they lived with many people and also with their livestock. In this situation, the pandemic regulations had to be completely done away with. After the devastating cyclone, the people once again came together to protect whatever was left and worked together to build the embankments which were washed away by the saline waters to prevent further damage. And besides this, one may interestingly observe that during the time of crisis, the Muslims and the Hindus, the upper class and the lower class, or the castes rather, the rich and the poor of the Sundarbans, they all came together to survive and sustain the disaster. Now, India is a land of diversity, and diversity is the cause of various socio-political, religious conflicts, communal conflicts in India, as well as in Sundarbans. And I'm just laying the premise. Now, I'll just stop here to look at a few interesting features of Sundarbans and its history. Now, the Sundarbans, and specifically the Shagor Island, which we more famously know as the Ganga Shagor. The Shagor Island was there in history since a long, long time. And at one point of time, this Shagor Island was 170 square kilometer in its area. In 1688, we come to know that there was a great flood, and it was caused due to earthquake, which now we define as tsunamis, which we know more as tsunamis. Almost 60,000 people died there. And since then, for a long, long time, this island was scarcely populated. And I'm referring to Shagor because it was the center of civilization during various phases, from which we will understand the significance and history of the Sundarbans. Now, after a long time, in 1863, we find the Englishman Hedges, who saw a Hindu temple there. In 1727, a person called Alexander Hamilton describes in his writings that this place, this island, is very, very important for the Hindus. They go to pilgrim there. Now, after the Battle of Plassey, we find that the English people would try to revive the Sundarbans as they would understand the potential of Sundarbans and how they may use it to enhance their trading with the world from India. Again, in 1688, as I was referring, after this great disaster, in 1737, there was another great earthquake, which killed almost 30,000 people. In 1883, and in a few years consecutively, there were great cyclones in Sundarbans. So the cyclones are not very new. And although the cyclones nowadays are caused due to various pollution related problems or environmental hazards, but these were not new. The Sundarbans were always vulnerable. We also find that the Sundarbans had great presence in history. We find Sundarbans mentioned in the writings of Megasthenes. We find that during the Magadha Empire, the Sundarbans had a great warrior tribe known as the Gangadhais. And it is fascinating to know that the great army of Alexander was not willing to attack India because Magadhas had this Gangadhais with a force of 6,000 elephants. And thus, Sundarbans is not something which is a place not without its own history. Now, coming to the present scenario, if I may, talk about the Sundarbans and its ecological features. The Sundarbans, which is a unique biosphere reserve and one of the global heritage sites, are located in the extreme south of West Bengal, an eastern Indian state, and obviously Bangladesh, the neighboring country. Representing a cluster of islands and surrounded by one of the most beautiful arrangements of mangrove forests with rich variety of flora and fauna, the Sundarbans, considered as the world's largest river delta, represent a unique biodiversity. It is famous for its Royal Bengal tigers, as we all know. The Indian part of Sundarbans covers almost 9,630 square kilometers in West Bengal, spreading across 106 islands in 19 administrative blocks of its 2 districts, 6 from North 24 Parganas and 13 from South 24 Parganas. And it is crisscrossed by complex river systems, as we all know, the Matla River, the Bidyathori River, the Herobanga River, the Hetania Doania River, okay, so and so forth. Now, as you know, Sundarbans would literally mean the beautiful forests, and it gets its name from the tree Sundari, which is the major vegetation, along with Geo, another tree, which is very, very prevalent in this area. Now, when we go beyond the biodiversity of this area and we look at the human face of the Sundarbans now, the area outside the core reserve forest, which is 54 islands where we have people and almost 4 million people is inhabiting here in Sundarbans. The inhabitants in the Sundarbans started even before the islands fully emerged through the siltation of the rivers. So you have to understand that the inhabitation in Sundarbans started as Sundarbans was constantly changing its own self. It's not conducive for human settlement. So as we blame the Sundarbans for causing floods and all inundations, but we have to understand that it is not meant for man. We have settled there, encroached the space for ourselves. Many people started migrating from the districts of Midnapur, and during India's war with Bangladesh, or for the freedoms of Bangladesh with Pakistan in 1972, a large number of migrants from Bangladesh found shelter in this tight country of the Sundarbans. The human flow of multiple origins has made it a land of mixed culture. But despite such diversity, due to harsh geographical challenges, the islanders struggle to survive on subsistence level. we find that Sundarbans also do have a poor physical infrastructure. There are only 42-kilometer railway line and about 300 kilometers of metal roads, which has significantly increased during the present regime of the government, and it has extended further. And we have now roads, very good roads and communication, even to the farthest part of the island. Now, from here on, let us talk about Amphan, the cyclone, and Yas, the two cyclones which happened during the pandemic. I will share the PowerPoint presentation with you also that I can describe as I show you the pictures. Before that,
Arijit, just please wrap up this process as soon as possible in 2-3 minutes at the time of discussion. So we will take your idea, your paper. Otherwise, you will eat up others panelists' time. Okay, just
okay. I will just try to give me just 5 minutes. I'll just wrap it up. What we try to do during this Amphan and Yas, a group of teachers from Kolkata tried to form a group and try to conduct relief work, and all the studies and all the results have come from there. We have covered places from the western part of Sundarbans to the eastern part of Sundarban, places like Hingolganj, Nazat Kalinagar, Mathurapur, Janardanpur, Kumirmari, Sagar Islands, Kakdip, Hasnabad, G Plot, Pathor Pratima, Sandeshkali, Malekan Gumti, Govindokati, and others. Now I'll just share a few pictures and I'll make my observations and I'll wrap up as the chair has instructed. Okay, so you see here in the picture how the embankments were washed away by the tidal waters. Now, as the relief work started, people forgot the fact that the relief work is not a permanent solution. Relief work needs also to be sustainable. For example, there were many groups, and I obviously share my sincerest gratitude towards all the groups who have worked there, but the groups have been working for a very short span of time, but the problems increase as the inundations become more and more old. The stagnant waters, they start degrading due to various biological factors, ecological factors, sorry. And sustainable means you have to at least support them for 3 to 6 months. But again, relief is only a temporary solution. You can see the images of various places where relief works were being carried out. And taking into account the danger that they faced and their desire to survive, you can look at the queues here, where although we had instructed them to maintain the COVID protocol, but in their desire to survive, it was impossible to maintain them. So these are the problems which we face during carrying out the relief works, and these are the stagnant waters. And I would like to say that people, when they do not get any food thereafter these cyclones, they survive on the fishes that have come within this stagnant waters, and it is very, very dangerous. These are the boroj, if you can see the right picture, boroj or the betel plantations. It is an important part of Sundarban economy, but the borojes or this betel plantations were completely ruined, and there is no government support as of now, but policies have to be made to make sure that we get this kind of support. Also, looking at, there are a few points which you may read while I make my observations. Health infrastructure was poor, but it is continuously being developed by the present government. And I would like to mention a name here, Dr. Subrata Moitra, who had worked significantly to uplift the whole medical situation there, scenario there, healthcare system, by developing PPP models and critical healthcare and arranging water ambulance facilities. Thus, because I don't have enough time, I would simply say, and I may obviously comment during the discussion, that this COVID has made us realize that when we study a region and its culture, it's not merely about the texts or not merely about the folklores. If we really want to understand the culture of a place and work properly, the areas have to be kind of crossed and transcended, and many aspects have to taken into account in order to really understand the culture, which is the premise for what we now know as the future studies. Perhaps culture studies would open its own space up to look at and incorporate the future studies, which will help the Sundarbans. And the policy should be a very benign, humble cohabitation with Mother Nature, and only that's the solution. Further discussions and observations may be made if the chair permits during the discussion. I'll not take up any further time. Thank you.
Thank you, Arijit. So we will comment on the papers uh, after the presentation of papers. So I would like to call upon next paper presenters, Sayan Mukherjee. Please, Sayan Mukherjee. Please, Sayan, present your paper. Just you will get 15 to 20 minutes. So try to, Sayan or Ronit. Ronit, we will present the paper.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Ronit, just carry on your
Yes. So,
presentation.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'm really thankful and quite privileged to be a part of this webinar and this virtual space. I'm being thoroughly enriched, I would say, since yesterday. And my deliberation would chiefly dwell upon the Anthropocene, and we are living in a time where environmental crisis, deforestation, and extinction of species, pollution, these things are rampant, the global warming, and Anthropocene, and I will try to locate that within the writings of Amitav Ghosh, Anu Jalais, and obviously I will also like to uh, apply the theory by Dipesh Chakraborty. And here, what I'm trying to argue is that this anthropocentric behavior, this has become akin to large-scale planetary forces, and we are by environmental colonialism and other anthropocentric behavior, we are negatively altering the planet's ecosystem, and this is happening with greater rapidity than any other era. And we obviously know that the term Anthropocene was proposed by the renowned chemist Paul Crutzen, and later in the year 2000, Crutzen, along with the lake scientist Eugene F. Stormer, adopted the term to denote, and I quote, the current geological epoch and quote, the central role of mankind in geology and ecology. Now, however, this kind of large-scale impact, it cannot stand distinct from moral concerns. It has had a twofold life. One is the moral, and the other is the scientific. Now, human beings, very much a part of environment, cannot stand unscathed when this kind of environmental colonialism is happening. Now, I would like to quote John R. McNeill in his landmark book, Something New Under the Sun, an environmental history of the 20th century world. And he states that, and so I particularly like this line, Albert Einstein famously refused to believe that God plays dice with the world. But in the 20th century and in the 21st century, humankind has begun to play dice with the planet without knowing all the rules of the game. So my paper will try to show this kind of anthropocentric behavior is not only imperiling the environment, but also destroying the socio-economic, moral, and physical existence of the inhabitants of the Sundarbans, as recorded by Anu Jalais in Forest of Tigers and Amitav Ghosh in Gun Island. Now, taking a very brief look at the history, now human settlement in the Sundarbans is a ruthless anthropoid violation of nature, to say the least. Now, Anu Jalais's account of the history of the human settlement in the Sundarbans bears the stamp of environmental colonialism. In modern period, the Sundarbans began to be peopled after 1765, with migration happening in the middle of the 19th century, when the British, the colonizer of India, engaged in double colonization by mindless deforestation of the Sundarbans for agricultural purpose with the aim of generating fresh revenue. Now, the landless laborers and Adivasis tried to reclaim the swampy ground for agriculture, thus trying to fit in forcefully. And this has been the problem throughout, I think, because this forceful kind of fitting in has been the cause of all the suffering that has happened, and that has been wonderfully traced by Ghosh. And this fitting in forcefully by taming the natural environment. We human beings have, we human beings have become arrogant enough, and we think that that nature can be tamed, which really cannot be. And now, what happens is this migration, this kind of migration and violation has been happening throughout history. In the 17th and 18th centuries, fishermen, woodcutters, pirates have lived there on boats. In the early 16th century, the Portuguese pirates, along with the Arakan Marma from Burma, terrorized the Sundarbans so much so that the place came to be known as Moger Muluk, or literally translated to pirate's den, and more generally as an anarchic place. Nature has also unleashed its wrath on the people. We get a picturesque account of the misery of people in Amitav Ghosh's novel, where he portrays the displacement, physical and psychological suffering of the people. Now, storms ravage the Sundarbans, continuously making the region uninhabitable, just the way it should have been during its virgin state. Now, Ghosh depicts how women have taken to prostitution to sustain themselves, how the embankments have broken and saline water has destroyed agriculture. There is mass evacuation, destroyal of communities with families being dispersed. The young drifted to cities and thronged in the slums, while the old have taken to begging. Now, a very important character, Moina, in Gun Island, realizes, and I quote, "Sometimes," said Moina, "it seemed as though both land and water were turning against those who lived in the Sundarbans. When people tried to dig wells, an arsenic-laced dew gushed out of the soil. When they tried to shore up embankments, the tides were higher and higher, pulled them down again and again. There is psychological degradation, as well as Ghosh depicts, that young boys and girls were stealing to pay the agents who could smuggle them to Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Now, Moina's son, Tipu, is a classic example of such deterioration caused by hostile circumstances. Being displaced after his father's death, shown in Ghosh's Hungry Tide, he was educated by Pia and Nilima, two other characters, and he constantly found it difficult to fit in, both in his hometown as well as in the United States. The continuous displacement and cultural flux made him wayward. Now, Tipu says, and I quote, "But now the fish catch is down, the land's turning salty. You can't go into the jungle without bribing the forest guards, sorry. On top of that, every year, you get hit by a storm that blows everything to pieces. So what are people supposed to do? What would anyone do? If you are young, you can't just sit on your butt till you starve to death. Even the animals are moving. If you have got any sense, you'll move. And to do that, you need someone who can help you to find a way out. Now, the gun merchant legend in Ghos's Gun Island also symbolizes the shallow, crafty nature of human beings trying to deceive nature and ultimately getting destroyed, as evident in Horan's speech. Horan also gives a dreadful account of the predicament post the 1970 storm, when, and I quote, he had come close to losing his life. We find picturesque images of death, extinction, and apocalypse when he says, and I quote, rivers and ponds had dried up, and the stench of rotting fish and dead livestock had hung heavy in the air. Half of the people had died of starvation. Parents had sold their children, and people had been reduced to eating carcasses and cadavers. Now, the marine biologist, Pia, speaks of the decimation of the natural habitat when she speaks of rapidly increasing, and I quote, oceanic dead zones, where the low oxygen content kills the marine habitat. This is caused mostly because of residues from chemical fertilizers. She also pointed out to a refinery that started in the Sundarbans. They are poisoning the place for their own profit and have politicians in their pockets on both sides of the border, India and Bangladesh, of course. Now, Pia says, and I quote, I'm beginning to suspect that they have been dumping effluents into rivers when they think they can get away with it. We have been seeing things we had never seen in these waters before, massive fish kills, for example. This also affected the dolphins she had been studying and researching for many years. They have abandoned their old hunting grounds. So we see that natural and human precariousness are inextricably intertwined, as recorded by Amitav Ghosh. Now, Dipesh Chakraborty, in his book, The Climate of History in a Planetary Age, notes that the ontic certainty, the quote-unquote ontic certainty of the world, which Edmund Husserl once famously called, is being challenged. And he says, and I quote, our everyday thoughts have begun to be oriented, thanks again to the current dissemination of geological terms, such as the Anthropocene in public culture, by the geological fact that the earth that Husserl took for granted as the stable and unshakable ground from which the human thoughts arose actually has always been a fitful and restless entity in its long journey through the depths of geological time, unquote. Chakraborty also notes that it is not the people of the world. It is not that the people of the world did not see calamities before. They have always seen catastrophes before. But the Anthropocene has shaken this innate faith, this innate assurance that Earth's stability that human beings enjoyed erstwhile is no longer there. We are no longer certain whether the world will honor our trust as we poison her every day by polluting the air and contaminating the fresh water as depicted in Gun Island. Human species will near mass extinction, of which the predicament of the Sundarbans in Ghosh's novel serves as a fine example. So that is my argument about how this kind of anthropocentric behavior is akin to large-scale planetary changes, perhaps it's a slow poison. And we see this very rampantly in Ghosh's novel, and also Chakraborty very wonderfully points out this human beings perhaps in future we see that this kind of this earth it will not be enough for such kind of anthropocentric behavior that human beings are doing, and we will pay the price which we are paying, and right now also we are paying. So that's my deliberation.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Ronit, for your strict adherence to the time. Thank you very much for your paper. It's really a very good paper. The study is very in depth. We will discuss that at the end of other papers. So Ronit is a very young, energetic academician in Calcutta. Now he is teaching in Netaji Shatovarshiki College, that is West Bengal, under affiliated to West Bengal State University, Barashat, and he has done his post graduation from Calcutta University. So he is a very young guy, very young academician coming in forth. So thank you very much, Ranit. So our next paper presenter, Sayan Mukherjee. I think Sayan is ready for his paper. So presently Sayan is actually so teaching in Sundarban Mahavidyalaya, uh, that is in Kakdeep, which is affiliated by University of Calcutta. Sayan has completed his masters in English in 2015 from West Bengal State University. He has also completed another post graduation in English language and teaching from Netaji Subhash Open University. Uh, Interesting information for Sayan. He had qualified NET thrice, set from 20 different states, including West Bengal, and West Bengal State thrice in search of GRF. He is presently pursuing PhD from Swami Vivekananda University, that is based in Barakpur right now. Uh, he has published 15 articles in several prestigious journals and also continuously contributing chapters in edited volumes and several books. So I would call upon Sayan to present his paper. Please, Sayan, platform is yours.
Thank you, Oshimda, for this introduction. And I would like to thank the organizers of New Literaria. And it's an honor to be present here and presenting my paper with my fellow panelists. I would need all the helps possible from the listeners because my paper is in progress. It has not been completed yet. And just like after apocalypse, you need time to regroup, time to rebuild yourself, your community. Such is the condition of my paper. And the title of it is Persistence of Horror, an overview of texts on post-apocalyptic world order. And whenever we listen to this term, apocalypse in the simplest of terms, it means it is a massive destruction of the world which leads to the end of life on it. Susan Sontag, in her essay, labeled it as a fantasy of living through one's own death and more, the death of cities, the destruction of humanity itself. Because you see, in apocalypse, you do not die alone. It is not a normal death. It is not a martyr's death. Your death is collaborated by the destruction of your association, your community, your city in a dilapidated condition. The entire humanity faces destruction. So from individual destruction to large-scale mass destruction, such is the reach of this word, apocalypse. And whenever we mention such terms, such expressions, we try to look back to the religious scriptures, especially the Bible, because it deals with Western literature mostly. So this concept can be located in the biblical book of Revelation, which is the final book in the New Testament. And accordingly, it is considered as an event that could plausibly lead to a revolution and the subsequent birth of a hero who will redeem the mankind. Because apocalypse is about destruction, but there is a chance of redemption. What happens after apocalypse? A new world order. So a sense of redemption, the arrival of a hero, a new chance, a new growth. And even we may keep the story of the Noah and the ark at the back of our minds. And I may presently quote directly from this biblical portion, New Testament, from book of Genesis. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds. It will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth." This is from chapter 9, verse 12 to 16 from book of Genesis. So if we contrive apocalypse like a deadly storm which destroys everything, after the storm passes, there is a ray of hope. There is a flourishing of the rainbow which appears beyond the cloud and establishes a connection between God and man, rejuvenation and man. Sense of rejuvenation, a rebirth is there. We have talked about Western periphery. Now coming back to our own land, Eastern concepts. Similarly, because in every society and race has its own literature from where this idea of apocalypse comes. If you consider Hindu mythology, there is a mention of an apocalypse called Proloy. Proloy, we find this word in Vishnu Purana as well. It is stated that Kali Yuga, in which we are living in, is an age characterized by various vices like dishonesty, anger, lust, avarice, starvation, plague, etc., etc. All this will lead to alteration in every aspect of human life. And at this very moment, just like we have God, the omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God in the Bible, here we have Vishnu, and Vishnu will take the Kalki avatar and come to earth to save it and bring redemption. It is then that a race of morally righteous man will inhabit the world, and it will see an end to all evil. So a new generation of heroes, a new time of growth, of righteousness after a dead era, a fresh arrival of new energy, new source of growth. So there is always a positive anticipation along with a destructive undertone. Apocalypse has a positive anticipation of a new beginning alongside the discussion of a large-scale destruction. Even if we ignore ecclesiastical or eschatological approaches, we cannot argue that purification through disastrous means is deeply rooted in our consciousness. And I can remember this kind of therapeutic or purgatory approaches that we may find in tragedies, like catharsis. In every tragedy, you will encounter catharsis, a purgation of the senses, a therapeutic attitude towards the vision of life. And it has been well described by M.H. Abrams in Natural Supernaturalism, published in the year 1971. M.H. Abrams commented that apocalypse signifies a vision in which old world is replaced by a new, better world. And here you will also find another, what you might say, a capitalistic angle, the mentioning of consumerism, because in present day, consumers have a ravenous appetite when it comes to any form of entertainment, be it literature, be it video games or cinema, that is based on this concept of apocalypse and subsequent new world orders. So it is like a hot cake in the market. So there is a capitalistic angle attached to this apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic texts or presentations. And the setting of post-apocalyptic texts is extremely significant. Sometimes it is characterized by a scientific revolution, kind of experiment which has gone wrong, invasion of an evil yet powerful agent, alien invasion, or a zombie attack. So such images of plague, warfare, natural disaster, which might affect the entire world or be restricted to a particular area. The major theme in these works is fighting adversities and survival at any cost. And whenever this word survival comes, we can apply Charles Darwin's concept of survival of the fittest. We have heard it in biology books, and this is very much attached with apocalyptic texts, survival of the fittest. However, these survival instincts are not like that of a regular world running on principles of morality or rules and regulations where people follow norms, rules. Because we have to understand that this is a topsy-turvy world where normal regulations are subverted, changed. So here, this battle for survival is also unique in its own right. Because in this new world order, all the rules are reversed. The dictator Adolf Hitler himself said in his Mein Kampf, he has written that one must take positive steps to encourage the flourishing of the fitter, the best person, the fitter, because the system itself often works against them. And in this regard, both the oppressor and the oppressed can relate with this idea. So this is what Hitler has said. He was a fascist, but let us come to other thinkers who are well connected with philosophy or sociology or psychology. We can also view this concept of apocalypse from Descartes' dualism. It may implicate that the new world order perhaps it resides in our minds, has got rather little to do with the world's physical existence. It is a way of stating that matter does not have an existence of its own, as it exists in the mind. So here is the psychological conclusion to this, or dimension to this idea, that destruction or apocalypse does not only encounter our physical self, it also encounters our psychological strata. Our status is not only limited to the physical level, but also reached beyond physical level, a level of transcendentality or a level of psychological approach. And in this case, we can also relate this identification to Jacques Lacan's theories of the mirror and the symbolic stages, where there is a recognition and simultaneous misrecognition of their world. Just like it happens in the case of the babies, the mirror stages, the readers also experience a world order which is divorced from the real life experiences, where the norms are subverted. However,
I'm stopping you. Just wrap up your paper in 2-3 minutes. Okay.
However, the hallmark of the real world and its order does not entirely lose its significance. There is a sense of dual existence. So this post-apocalyptic world order is divorced from the earlier order, but there is also a sense of subterranean agreement. It is both reality and something beyond real. So there is always a duality, a dichotomy in this presentation of the new world order. And definitely when we speak about destruction, apocalypse, nothing can surpass the destruction of world wars. In the First World War, in World War I, it came with themes of terrorism, fascism, and violence. It seems like post-apocalyptic mood almost infects this period. While the daily scenario consisted of decay, no hope of redemption, this was also assisting the writers to shape their thoughts and come up with new narratives surrounding this war. So it was a point of inspiration for the writers. We may take H.G. Wells's book, which was published in the year 1940, in the year in which the First World War began, The World Set Free. It was written under the immediate shadow of these circumstances, the World War. It was also the time when atomic energy was on the verge of submission to the intelligence of human beings. A pocket entity worthy of mass destruction. And Wells himself precisely predicted that before the last war began, it was a matter of common knowledge that a man would carry about in a handbag an amount of latent energy sufficient to wreck half a city. So this was an age of realizing the weapons of mass destruction. The beginning of bio war. This was the age of First World War. And the then British Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself commented while reflecting upon Wells's work, might a bomb no bigger than an average orange be found to possess a secret power to destroy a whole block of buildings, nay, to concentrate the force of 1,000 tons of cordite and blast a township at a stroke. So orange, a fruit, which is a live beaver, is here compared, rather subverted in comparison in the layers of mass destruction. Such was the case in this time. I have further to say, but time will not permit me because there are other panelists. So I would like to conclude my deliberation by quoting some phrases, some expressions from T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, which is also very much post-apocalyptic in nature. And in these lines, we will find the themes of forgetfulness, infidelity, abominations, which is very much associated with the book of Ezekiel of the Holy Bible, and denotes this act of devastation. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this story? Rubbish? Son of man, you cannot stay or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images, where the sun beats and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and I will show you something different from either. Your shadow at morning striding behind you, or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I will show you fear in a handful of dust. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Shayan, for your study on apocalypse, and it's very romantic study of apocalypse. So we will discuss that in the questionnaire session and question answer session. So our next paper presenter, Professor Samrat Sengupta. Samrat is a very talented budding professor of English, now presently assistant professor of English of Sammiloni Mohabidyalaya, Kolkata. His research interests include experimental Bengali literature, gender, some kind of problem is coming, I think. Post-structuralism, memory studies, posthumanism. He has guest edited a special issue of International Journal, Songlap, on caste in humanities. His first Bengali monograph on Pratibader Pothokrom, syllabi of resistance, and it is actually forthcoming in 2021. His co-edited volume on Bengali experimental writer Nabarun Bhattacharya, titled Nabarun Bhattacharya, colon, Aesthetics and Politics in a World After Ethics, has been published recently from Bloomsbury. He is one of the founding members of the Indian Posthumanism Network. So this is a brief introduction for Shamrat. So I would like to call upon Shamrat to present his paper. I think there is some technical issues right now. Shamrat, just uh,
Thank you, Asim
clear
Da,
it. Okay, okay.
for your kind
I can,
introduction. So,
okay, I can hear you. Just you can carry on your presentation. Okay, Tanmay is there. So Tanmay just address the issue.
there is some technical problem. I'm not
Dada,
sure
I
what
think,
is happening with me.
Dada, I think you are
Am I
having
audible?
network. Yeah, you are perfectly audible.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible, Dada.
There is some disturbance.
Dr. Mukherjee, can you try logging in from another device? I think it is your internet connection. I think we lost him.
He is trying to connect from other devices.
I can't hear properly.
Yeah, Shamrat, have you connected?
Is this happening only with me? I don't know.
You are not in the screen, I think also. So am I audible for?
Sir, can you switch off your video and only try connecting with us through audio? Maybe that can work because
Am I audible?
you are audible, but it is lagging a bit.
What
Can
is
you try
happening?
switching
Yes,
off your video?
yes, you are audible.
Samrat Da, Asim sir, Asim
Am I
Da,
audible now?
Dada, you are audible.
I don't know what is the problem.
দাদা তো তুমি ভিডিও বন্ধ করে চলাও, so go with the audio only.
Yeah, I can go with the audio, but I am audible. Am I audible now?
Right now you are audible. Samrat, right now you are audible.
I can't hear anything.
Yes, yes. Samrat, I can hear you. Just you can carry on. Yeah.
Shall I switch on the video and see? Is this okay now?
It is okay, 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 okay.
Okay. Just let me share the screen and start.
Yes. Just go fast, finish it off, and then we will open the session and we'll discuss that. Okay.
Okay. I'll do that. I'll do that. Yes. So, sorry for the disturbance, and it is always difficult to become the last speaker after so many diverse areas have been covered and so many things have been discussed. So the title of my paper is Ecological and Political Disaster in Bengali Dalit Narratives, Partition as Hyper Event. So what I will be doing in my paper, to be very brief and precise, is I will try to connect. In general, we discuss the impact of the ecology or ecological disaster and how it manipulates, changes, transforms the social and political forces, shapes the society in a new way. But here I will also talk about how the political disaster is always incumbent on the ecological, particularly for the marginalized people. And I will use a few concepts like the event, the concept of the event, and the concept of disaster as it has been propounded by Maurice Blasho in his book, The Writing of the Disaster. So, partition, there have been various kinds of reading of partition. Historical and empirical, that is how what happened during the partition, the historical chronicling of the events, and also related to these, the political, different political forces which acted, whatever happened in the political field, and how it has actually moved us towards the event of partition. And then by people like Urvashi Butalia or Kamala Vasin and Ritu Menon, or in case of Bengal, the interventions made by Yashodhara Bagchi and Shubharanjan Dasgupta in their book, The Trauma and the Tomb, where the partition is studied from the point of view of memory and silence, and how there have been an absence of the alternative narratives of women and Dalit, how they have been silenced. So the reading of the silences of partition through memory, which is not sometimes archivable. Then we get the experiential narratives of partition, like which are often studied in a phenomenological way. The phenomenology and experience, that is another dimension. And then I quickly move on to partition as an event. And I will come very soon to what is an event. Event is something which is beyond and outside the historical forces. It comes through the historical process, but it supersedes the historical forces and becomes something else. And it affects the various other happenings, belongings, and becomings of history in a hitherto unforeseeable way. So that is the concept of the event which I will be using here from Alain Badiou, Zizek, and others, maybe Gadamer and Derrida also. But I don't have time to elaborate on those. So very quickly, and I use the term hyper event, which is a term coined by myself, where I talk about, I link two concepts. The one is the concept of the event and the concept of hyper objects. Hyper objects is a term coined by the theorist Timothy Morton, where he is talking about certain objects produced by man, which is transhuman in nature, which goes beyond the human capacity, like the creation of the radioactive waste, or the creation of the plastic waste, things like that, which supersedes human belonging and the human capacity. And I will read partition as an event, not only as a political event, but as a hyper event which shapes and re-narrates and relocates the other forces like the ecological forces also, and how it has certain bearings in the lives of the other of the human civilization, people who have been kept outside the gate of history and politics. So what is an event? Very quickly, I will read these two quotes. At first approach, an event is thus the effect that sometimes, no, not this one, this one. To break with empiricism, the event must be thought of as the advent of what is subtracted from all experience, the ontologically unfounded and the transcendentally discontinuous. So, while doing empirical work, whatever has been left out, whatever have been obfuscated from experience, that comes back in the force of an event. Event is something which actually relocates, like brings us back the kind of things which were not included as a part of our experience, of what we understand as experience. I will not read the quote fully. And there is another quote by Andy McLevert, where he discusses Alan Badiou. The earlier quote was from Badiou, where he says, in an event, the inconsistent multiplicity, that is the multiplicity which could not be accommodated to the oneness of history, which always lies beneath a particular social order, is able to appear subjectively. Only in an event can the excluded part be visible. So event is something where the excluded comes back, and I can say that the alienation and the subtraction of the Dalit population becomes more glaringly visible when we encounter the refugees flogging, particularly the homeless, destitute refugees, lower caste, undercaste refugees flogging in the city of Kolkata, becoming squatter here and there, just started staying in the railways, in the railway tracks, and occupying different places, and they could not be accommodated to the main structure of the city. So, but from my difference from Badiou is that when Badiou discusses event, he is hopeful. He thinks of event as a kind of revolutionary force. But in case of partition, it was not so. And I will quickly move to the second point, that event is a kind of fractured temporality. As I've already said, it is a deviation from the main forces of history. And we always read event from a distance. We can call event an event only after it has happened, and where we cannot locate the event in terms of the regular historical forces. Of course, it has happened through historical process, but once it has happened, it is not something which remains confined to the regular historical forces. It goes beyond that. The causality could not be located completely. And so there is the question of reading, and there is the question of historical distance. But as Elia Rauner, a theorist, he talks about in his book, in his article, The Event, Literature and Theory, he talks about the fictive distance, that how we read, the politics of reading the event through fiction, through literature, the literariness. And in case of literature, I also include the memoirs, the narratives of the Dalit migrants who describe their experience, and you also write stories and novels out of their experience. So these experiential narratives, in a way, constitute that fictive distance where we go back and think of the event as the event. We can recognize that it was an event, if not to everyone, at least to some people, in a manifold number of ways. And here, as I'm locating the idea of Maurice Blanchard's idea of disaster, and how I am talking here about disaster as an event, and you will see that how beautifully these two concepts merge. The disaster unexperienced, it is what escapes the very possibility of experience. It is the limit of writing. This must be repeated. The disaster describes. It's scribing means writing. It describes, but also describes, which does not mean that the disaster as the force of writing is excluded from it. is beyond the pale of writing or extra textual. So it is something which is within the text, but which could not be accommodated within the structure of our narrative. It is unimaginable, unthinkable. Disaster is something which is unthinkable. In our regular everyday lives, we keep disaster outside our vision, outside our thinking, just like we keep the realities of the Dalit, who are perhaps in perpetual disaster. I will quickly come to that. This kind of alienation of the Dalits also merges with the alienation of disaster, because those people live perpetually in disaster. Only in certain moments of political and ecological disaster we encountered them. Just as my fellow comrades, they have already discussed the concept of disaster in the context of Sundarbans or in the context of apocalypse. The disaster is something which is beyond the margins of thinking, and it affects the marginalized people in a much more manifold way than the others. And we keep both these entities, the marginalized people and disaster, outside our purview of thinking, unless and until we are forced to encounter them. It actually makes us hopeless in a number of ways. Shayan has discussed the concept of hopelessness, transcendental hopelessness through poems. I am talking about the passivity. Instead of activity, disaster makes us confront a certain kind of passivity where human action becomes impossible. And now quickly coming to the hyper objects, I already said that hyper objects are those objects which are created by man, but we goes beyond the human capacity and cognition, and it intervenes, penetrates everything, like the radioactive waste or the plastic, from which we don't have any escape. So I would coin that that partition is also one such kind of experience which could not be erased from the subcontinent, and it comes back like a ghost again and again. Different thinkers have talked about it, different historians have talked about it. There is this book called The Long Partition by I'll just read his name, Wazira Fazila Ikubali Jamindar. It's a very difficult name to pronounce. The Long Partition and the Making of Modern South Asia. That he calls partition as the long partition. The effect of partition, we don't know how it penetrates each and every life in the subcontinent in a number of ways. The histories, the politics, as we see today, we can take it up during the discussion. Even during the riots, which is continuing in Bangladesh and India, it always have a kind of reckoning of the event of the partition in a number of ways. But here I'm talking about the effect of the entanglement of the political and the ecological, that the political shapes the ecological, particularly the ecological world of the destitute, the kind of the Dalits, the Dalit migrants. And I'm using these books, this book by Manohar Mouli Bishwas, Amar Jibone Ami Beche Thaki, which has also been translated. And this book, most of this book does not talk about partition. The partition event comes in the end, but it talks about the relationship of the Dalits with the nature. Which is very, very important. The relationship of the Dalits with the nature. Surviving in my world, as you can see, it talks about my world, the world of the Dalit, which is destituted, which is separated from the mainstream, and which is something which is close to nature. The binary of nature and culture, man and non-human, collapses because man comes close to nature in a number of ways. So if you read this narrative of Manohar Mouli Bishwas, you will see how he compares himself with a water hyacinth, how he compares himself with people of mud and water. He calls himself the people of mud and water. And how his location, in terms of location, where he stayed in Bangladesh, it was away from the mainstream, it was away from the railway track, it was away from the police station, it was away from all kinds of medical facilities and exposed to death. And this is something which takes him close to nature, and this continues in a new way during the partition, where the partition migrants were considered as expendable in the forces of history. And there is this other book, perhaps I don't have time to discuss here. Ashimda, how much time do I have?
Sir, please go ahead. We have time.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just try to finish in 5 minutes maybe. Just
Right,
quickly. Thank you. Uh, I intended to discuss two narratives by Jatin Bala. One is his memoir Shikar Chera Jibon, and Shikar Chera Jibon again as a natural metaphor of attachment to the land and separation from it. So it's a kind of the disaster is both political and ecological for them, particularly when he describes how the Dalit migrants of it is from the East Pakistan, the then East Pakistan, were destituted not only politically, not only in terms of losing their country, but also going outside their home, outside the security of human habitation, and exposed to raw, naked nature. So this is a very, very important work. And if you read books by Shekhar Bandopadhyay, Doipayan Sen, Debjani Sengupta, or Anusua Bosu Mojumdar, that is not mentioned here, you will see how the patterns of Namashudra migration. Namashudras, though they came from Dalit caste, they had some degree of empowerment in Bangladesh. They had some kind of property, not property, some amount of land there. And when they were uprooted from the land, as the Shikar Chera Jibon suggests, the title, uprooted from the uprooted life. So when they were uprooted, they were totally exposed to all kinds of vulnerabilities, to environmental precarities. And in the narrative, repeatedly we see that how when they were traveling from East Pakistan to India, in a number of ways, the rainfall, the outbreak of a fire in a refugee camp, all these things made them more and more vulnerable than maybe the other upper caste migrants who were given better settlement package by the government. And these people were constantly being pushed to the margins, to places where there were very little scope of agriculture, like in Dandakaranya or in Andaman, in all kinds of malevolent situations. And these people, and we see the descriptions are so gory, so violent, so unbearable. You see that life and death happening together in the same space. Almost they were becoming, as Agamben said, bare life, exposed to nature, with totally completely vulnerable, without any security, close to nature. They were giving birth, and by close and close to the place of giving birth to a child, without any care, someone was dying. So this is more or less the situation. As I have said, this is the structure of abandonment of the nation state, which becomes exposed when we see the conspiracy. I would call this conspiracy of partition, which happened in a way that the Dalit settlements majorly fell in the Pakistan, as Doipayan Sen has discussed in his work. And therefore, a lot of Dalit migrants who initially did not move, they did not move in the 40s, but they started moving from the 50s onwards, and they were exposed to death, disease. They were exposed to all kinds of natural calamities repeatedly. And so I'll just not read this section. You can read it yourself. This is a picture where the railway track settlement is very important, railway colonies, because if we call it colonies at all, because these are lives in transit. These are lives in transit which do not have a closure. They question continuously the government projects, government closure, and there were many people who were constantly coming back. And this is a research done by my friend Annesha Sengupta on the railway refugees, and it corroborates very much with Jatin Bala's experience of when he was being transferred from the railway tracks to the refugee camp. A camp again is a very, very temporary, as the name suggests, temporary place of abode, where minimum security from ecological damage were not available. So I end here, but just one reference which I could not discuss in my paper, the reference to the short story Bastu Bhumi. That name Bastu Bhumi is very ironic because it actually talks about a Dalit migrant individual who was looking for a home in a moment of ecological disaster, heavy rainfall, and it was constantly his condition was constantly contrasted with the city of Kolkata, which was a city of big skyscrapers. Even then, maybe in the 60s, the big buildings, and his condition where he could not have a single place to uh, uh, shade his head. So, and this is a kind of coming back of the Dalit alienation, which is described in Jatin Bala's narrative. Maybe Jatin Bala wrote in his book Shekhar Chera Jibon, where once when he was traveling with his father during a rainy day, he wanted to take shelter under a Brahmin household, and he was desperately thrown out from there by saying that, see, the rain goddess is also angry with you Dalits, because you don't obey the caste order. So in a city like Kolkata that comes back, and the person Aghor Gharami, the main character of the story, one says that we think we pray that rain never should happen. So it's a different perspective, it's a different world where a person says that rain should not never happen. We always look for rain as a kind of boon, as a kind of divine sanction, but it is totally different from a Dalit experiential point of view. With this, I end my presentation. If there are questions, I will take it up further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, all the paper presenters. These very important for papers being presented, and it has opened up new questions. I will just make a very short comments on the papers. Those are being presented here. Orijit's paper, mainly he has talked about his case study during Amphan and recently ended uh, so-called the uh, event uh, Yash. And in Orijit's paper, Orijit is trying to say that Sundarban is a landmass which is continuously in a state of flux. Human settlements in the Sundarbans, uh, it is not new about, because the Puran has referred the human inhabitation in the Sundarbans, and the people, we do understand that Sundarban means the 24 Parganas. In the 80s, it has been divided into two 24 Parganas. One is 24 Parganas South and the 24 Parganas North. But it is not the same case. Calcutta itself is the part of the Sundarbans, bigger Sundarbans. So once again, that hegemonic idea that actually in the very beginning of Orijit's paper, that he has talked about that vertical community and the horizontal community. Who are the vertical community here in the Sundarbans? So the people, they are Dalits, they are lower caste Hindus, and the Muslims. They are living there, and starting from Sagar, Kakdeep, Namkhana, Pathur Pratima, Mathurapur, Raidighi, Canning, Choto Mullakhali, Gosaba, Lahiripur, then Hingalganj, Hasnabad, Kalitala, Malakan Gumti. So all these areas, these are 19 blocks, 54 islands out of 156 islands in Indian parks. Those are people are living here in the Sundarbans, and the most important, the precarity of the situation is that the life is vulnerable, but at the same time, life is very close to the nature. The people living in the Sundarbans, very close to the nature, and that is why uh, what we talk about. This is once again while we study Dalit life, while we study life of Sundarbans. Once again, while we study about Indian politics or Indian cultural studies, most of the time our tendency is to look at Indian life from the European point of view, from the European mindset, from the European theories, but we don't study all those things as an insider. So once again, you don't get a text as the narration from the people who are actually vertically from the vertical community who are living there. Once again, the text, the idea that is we are coming in the academia, those are exactly the view of the Calcuttans, the Kolkata people. So this is not just exactly the information, the idea. Once again, I'm referring to our Schomburg's paper. That is the silence. Silence is once again. It is not the partition. Partition is an event. Once again, the life of Sundarban is also an event. And if Sundarban is protected, then only Calcutta will be protected. Otherwise, if there is no Sundarban, there is no Calcutta, because the landmass, the nature, the human inhabitation, if you look at Calcutta from the remote sensing GIS map, then you will understand even 500 years ago, 400 years ago, this is densely, located jungle. So if you look at the names, just like Sialdaho, Doho means lake. Those are the things actually. If you go to the Babughat, you will have the flora and faunas that is being seen in the Sundarbans. So once again, what from Odidite's paper that he's concerned about, his paper is concerned about the sustainable development for Sundarbans. So for that case only, he actually tried to mention that. I think he has missed that. It is, I think it is there in his paper, that the concept of a ring, just like ring road, it is a ring band because of only silt for Sundarbans, the mangrove forest. And because of the siltation, the river is having the same water, but they are shallow, and that is why that during the high tide, with even a low speed of wind speed, it inundates everything, and that is why Ronnie's paper, that is Amitabh Ghosh's paper, or Amitabh Ghosh's novel, or Anujali's important book From Salkia to Sajjalia. That he's talking about, and it is hard a study based on that particular area. She was residing there at Sajjalia and also in Goshaba. She has studied that on those people who are actually the widow people living the widow villages there because of snake biting, or their lives being lost because of the tiger attacking of tigers, and all those so many things beyond control, because life is so vulnerable there in the Sundarbans. So once again, the ring bath concept only, if you made the embankment, taking lands, the people living already there in the Sundarbans, so make it chor, Nodir chor, the river, so that the river water can flow, can play during the high tide, on that particular land, and automatically the creation of the mangrove forest, and that only the mangrove forest can sustain or can revive Sundarbans. Otherwise, in coming days, the future of Sundarbans is very, very bleak. And if it is bleak, it is cloudy, then even the future of Calcutta is uh, absolutely cloudy, and we are heading towards a massive disaster. So once again, Orijit, thank you for your important observation. It's a very good case studies. You have mentioned three, four events: 1688, 1737, 1883. So this is very important paper. I think this is very illuminating paper. Once again, Ronnie's paper is very, very in-depth study on uh, Ghosh's novel, and also Anuj Ali's observations, displacement. Uh, Also, you have mentioned some of the. Once again, these are actually ideas from the people who are living in the urban area, talking about the prostitution mentioned in Ghosh's paper. But prostitution in the Sundarbans is not that you understand in the red light area in Kolkata. So that is there, and uh, you have mentioned the idea in Gun Island, and the actually the life and death, life and death are so closely decided there in the Sundarbans, that naturally they are they have developed a kind of stoicism. It's not the stoicism talking about the Greek stoicism. It is a kind of a stoicism that is actually very, very, very life-centric stoicism, and that made them very, very strong enough to counter these disaster. And disaster is so common in their life. The people, the parts of the Sundarbans. If you look at the Sundarbans in the western part of the Sundarbans, southwestern part of India, southwestern part of the Sundarbans, that is Sagar, Namkhana, Kagdi, Pathar Pratima. People coming from the eastern, that is Midnapur, the East Midnapur, basically there, and the flora and fauna uh, is not so densely located as far as the Sundarban is concerned. If you move towards the uh, eastern part of the Sundarbans in the India's part, then you realize that the people coming from the uh, East India, East Bengal, that is Bangladesh, that is Sampur and all this area of Bangladesh, divided by the river, that is the river Ichamuti, and the other river is there. Uh, so this part actually populated by the people coming from Bangladesh, and the migration, the displacement is still going on. And the people who are coming, as Samrat has already mentioned, that people are coming from the Sundarbans. The people of the upper caste people, they got the privilege to come early, and that is why they got the better position in the society in West Bengal. But the people who are actually lower caste, and the Muslim people, some of the Muslim people also there. So we did not count them, but they are also there. So they are being sent to the Dondakaranya, coming from the Bangladesh, which is fertile, and life is so very easy to, as far as the earning of livelihood. So they have moved towards that Dondakaranya, even in Karnataka, Raichur, Andamans, So these are the parts of the area where they are being relocated, and it is once again, the Onyx paper has uh, given those glimpses. And science paper is very important to mention that science has tried to uh, place some kind of balm on the trauma of disaster. That is, his paper has read a kind of a romantic study on this apocalypse. That is, he has mentioned Bible, how Bible has viewed disaster, and also from our Puranic point of view. Uh, but at the same time, he has seen that the new order has taken place after the disaster. It's true, but the people who were really the sufferer, for them, this romantic idea is it's a far cry. So once again, Somrat's paper is highly, illuminating. He has importantly mentioned uh, the reading of partition. Uh, the important part of the partition is that trauma is so overwhelming that people cannot utter the words. When literature comes, literature comes from a very actually when words come out, then your deeply or traumatic idea is diluted. When trauma is very high, word cannot come. So partition is such a trauma that it has to be understood through silence. Okay, so through Baranda, through Dawa, through Thakuma's silence, in the light of Lonthon, something like that, in Muthaghas. So I'm not talking about that. The absence of women and the Dalit this is very important idea, and he has elaborated his idea of hyper event, that is beyond how event is created by a human being, but he has rightly mentioned that it's just like a demonic stature, that it is beyond control of human capacity. So it's beautifully he has shown that disaster is an hyper, just like COVID. It is an hyper event. Uh, uh, and in your day-to-day life, the disaster is there, but we try to forget those, because it's such a violence that you cannot control that. So exodus of people, and not only the exodus of people are not, if you're politically uprooted, you can manage that. But if you're ecologically uprooted, it is it is hardly you can recompense that loss. So I open all these papers for discussion, for questions to the audience. So right now, I can just request the host to take the questions if there in the uh, chat box or from the audience. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, sir. I myself had a question, not a question, something to sort of look into. Since two of the papers of the panel talked about Sundarban at large, I was wondering, why is it so? Why is it that suddenly we are talking about Sundarban, and more so about after Amitabh Ghosh wrote The Hungry Tide? And the answer is very simple, and he himself wrote about it in The Great Derangement. And he talked about the importance of storytelling, the importance of fiction in dealing with climate change, in dealing with issues about climate change. Because at the end of the day, climate change, no matter how much the discourse is taken up by science and STEM disciplines, what it affects is people, and how to reach out to people is through stories, through fiction. So I was wondering if you could talk about how you see that, and how you view writership, and who is writing, what are they writing about, and why are they writing, just that. Thank you.
Well, if I may take up Ankona's question or the permission of the chair, Ankona, I completely understand.
Yes, yes, carry on.
I completely understand your observation, but I would just like to move away from your observation and say that it is this thing. Yes, Amitabh Ghosh is doing something which is obviously significant, but the last thing that you have mentioned, it is who's writing, who is writing. That is very, very important for us to understand. And here we do not need any sympathetic observation, but a wholehearted participation if we really want to understand Sundarbans and if we really want to work for Sundarbans, and it will not be us. The writings are there in the roads and the nooks and the jungles and the corners of Sundarbans, and writings are coming up, should come from there. And that's why people from the center has to move to the centers of Sundarban, and I will not describe that as a periphery, which is kind of unacceptable to my ethics. And it is not. I will just like to humbly tell you that, well, we must have known about these Sundarbans and the jungles from the writings of Ghosh, perhaps for the first time, or some of those dacoit stories, Bangla Dakat and all. But there are so many people. I'd referred to Dr. Subrata Moitra. Even his father, Kashikanta Moitra, was the first Sundarban Affairs Minister. And there are many other people within the Sundarbans. And that's where lies the importance of developing community feeling and a sustainable development coming from within the community. Because there is always a problem when the so-called people from center will go there and try to solve their problem. It is impossible. There should be a collaboration. That is fine. There should be a kind of an overlapping. Even that's fine. But it's not merely about Ghosh and his writing, which must drive towards the protection and towards the kind of saving the environment of Sundarbans. It should be coming from within. For example, Professor Mondal here, the chair, is the son of soil. And he goes back there after he has transcended the limitations. And there are obvious limitations, which we cannot deny. He has transcended them, and then he has gone back there. And there are many people who go back there. And unfortunately, there are more people who shed off their identity and do not go back there. We have to transcend those things. And it's a whole lot of complex thing. It doesn't have that umbrella answer or solution to it. If I have just tried to.
Pranota Bhattacharya. Pranota Bhattacharya. Pranota Bhattacharya.
Please
If
unmute.
you,
Yeah.
yeah, you can ask your questions, Pranota Bhattacharya.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I would like to thank all the panelists and organizers and for this illuminating session. And I would like to comment on the papers, not specific, general comment and some queries, not questions really. So basically, I found that when Shamratna talked about the Dalit perspective, when we got the apocalypse perspective, and within all this, I found that sometimes we actually forget about the spatial continuity of the disaster and marginality. When we address the marginality during the disaster, and disaster, this term is extremely inclusive. It has a lot of dimensions. If we try to define disaster, it has a vast and inclusive, all-inclusive definition: human disaster, biological, biomedical disaster. So when we are trying to look into it, then we are actually ignoring the spatial nature, and we are addressing the temporality. We are not addressing the prolonged spatial continuity. Along with that, what is missed here, that when we are talking about the spatial reconfiguration, when we are talking about the silence, the passivity, I am extremely glad to see that there are papers like this, that we are talking about the passivity we are not talking activity, rather its passivity, what Shamradda said. I think this is absolutely true. And along with that Dalit perspective, I would like to bring the tribal perspective and women's perspective, because when disaster happens, in case of Bengal, as I'm a teacher in a rural area, and I see that tribal people, rural people, the students we are coming into the universities and colleges, they're extremely vulnerable to the disaster. When there is a flood, when there is pandemic, they're extremely vulnerable and they're having the first blow. And their marginalization is not only an ecological marginalization, this is also eco-political marginalization. And we have a tendency, a constant colonial tendency in the post-colonial society, that constantly it is debarring the marginalized to be united. And I want to know what are the perspective, what are the takes on this issue from all the panelists. Thank you and best wishes.
Should I take
Thank
it up?
you.
Yeah, with your permission, I'm taking it up.
Right.
Thank you for your illuminating comment. Really, like, I like the question. See, one thing is disaster, disease, death. This doesn't have an end. This is very much a part and parcel of our life. The problem is when we don't recognize these things and put people to perpetual suffering. I was referring to this text by Blasho, The Writing of the Disaster, and where he's talking about the disaster as something which is other to the life. It is projected as the other to the life. It is projected as the other of writing, other of discourse. We do not think of disaster as something, and that is the human problem. We don't think, just like we don't think about death when we are living. We don't think about disaster during the times of non-disaster. And that is one of the reasons for, very directly speaking, the reason for ecological catastrophe. Likewise, the political catastrophe is also, the disasters happen also due to human callousness of not seeing disaster as an immanent and all pervasive like shadow which is there around the civilization. And what I am trying to say is there are Dalit narratives, there are narratives from women, but how it is not only about writing, or this is not only about availability. It is also about how we are reading it, how we are reading the experiences, the specificity. That is why I just as an instance, I use the term passivity. But there can be other points of departure also, like the point of spatial alienation. You were talking about the spatial continuity, not only temporal, but also spatial alienation. And the marginalization is not only about caste, it is also about locatedness, as Ashimda brilliantly and beautifully pointed out from his experiences of Sundarban. And you also said working in a marginalized, in a small place which is outside Calcutta, where you see the students who are spatially alienated from the mainstream, and that comes repeatedly, that keeps coming back. So we need to recognize the problems, even in a kind of, and one thing is that when we think of a problem, we think in terms of ecological problem, political problem, but we have to coordinate them, we have to think them together. Just as nowadays in school, people study all the subjects together. You need to study geography, history, not literature, not as disconnected. And that interdisciplinary way of also approaching the problem is needed. Otherwise, you think that you give some dole, you give some support, you send some charity, and the problems will get solved. No, you also have to simultaneously think about the political aspect, the sociological aspect, the spatial aspect, everything together. So, and that can be gathered from the experiences. The experiences are not only for literary closed room discussion. It is also meant for gathering knowledge and making policy. That is what I believe. Thank you.
There was a, if I just may add, there was a specific point raised up, and that is the idea of spatiality and inclusivity. I will just add on to this. that I have been working in the Sundarbans for a mere 9 years. Professor Mondal is working since more than perhaps 20 years. And there were people and there are people who have been working there even longer. I'll just tell you something. There are many doctors from Kolkata who go there and they organize those medical camps. But many of them are unable to solve one simple problem. That is, the women of the Sundarbans have fungal problems, fungal diseases, specifically in between the fingers of their feet. They give temporary medicines and the disease come back. And that's where lies the idea of inclusivity and upliftment of the base by the base. It's not a trickle-down development method. If there are community doctors, if there are community practitioners, medical practitioners, then they will know that this woman lives in a place which is marshy, which is always kind of mostly inundated or at least wet all throughout the year. And that's why the treatment has to be done accordingly. It has no temporary solution by suggesting or prescribing one simple tube of a medicine like Tibet. Secondly, when we talk about, and I agree with you, that temporality of disaster and concentrating upon that is another disaster. And this has been done by the media when Yas happened and Amphan happened. It was a kind of a concert or opera, which we all watched back at the safety of our room. We have to link the spatiality and the temporality to find out and establish a continuity to bring in a paradigmatic sustainable development. And that's why I have tried to refer to the history of the cyclones which Sundarbans had faced and also will face in future. And that's where Professor Mondal was talking about sustainable development in the form of development of ring embankments and development of an plantation of mangroves, which will act as the Spartan flanks and protect the people of Sundarbans in the future. That's the motto. Thank you.
With permission of Oshinda, I would like to add something from my paper.
Yes, yes.
Actually, is concerning this discussion about apocalypse and marginality and this prolonged continuation of disaster. I was to mention a film, Mad Max Fury Road. I think many of us have seen this film, and we can analyze this idea of marginality from one particular scene where the main villain, Immortan Joe, a warlord, he was standing atop a hill and he was distributing water as an act of courtesy. And in this ironic scene, beneath him are standing the dusty, the thirsty, the dry and starving people of the state, but rather people of this dictatorship. And he goes on to address them like Jesus Christ, like a redeemer. I am your redeemer. It is by my hands you will rise from the ashes of this world. And the people below him are waiting with bowls and trays. As soon as he is done speaking, they slowly start getting closer to the hill. Just like you address your deity, just like you come closer to your deity or its idol. Joe pushes two levers, which opens two gates on the hill from where the water starts flooding out. However, much before everyone can get their fair share of water, he immediately pulls back the lever and says, "Do not, my friends, become addicted to water. It will take all and you will all resent its absence." And we can recollect the scenes from Satyajit Ray's Hirok Rajar Deshe, je onahare nahi khed beshi khele bare mein. It is like that he is using water as a tool to marginalize the subjugated people. So there you have the eco-critical objective performed in the text, performed in the film. And also you're using that tool to marginalize people. You're ruling from the center atop the hill. So you are like God. You're belonging to the center. You're marginalizing the subjugated, the poor, the rusty people. So this is a typical political angle attached to this text, this film. So we have an eco-critical, eco-political angle to this film. And further, at the end of the film, when we will see that Immortan Joe and his army is being destroyed by the hero and the heroine, we must always keep in mind that the hero and the heroine, both of them belong to this marginalized class, and they uprooted this hegemonistic, this dictatorship of Imotenjo. And finally, we can say that ultimately, after this continuous or prolonged, disastrous, dystopian contest between these two powers, one remaining at the center, one at the periphery, at the margin, finally, it is the rise of the proletariat that has been described in this film. So I think in post-apocalyptic texts or films, there is always eco-critical or eco-political issues, and there is always the prolonged concern about the marginalized people. Thank you.
Right. Uh, how much time we have left with?
I think we have exceeded the time, and organizers were benevolent enough to allow us to continue our discussion. So if there are no other questions or queries, we may, with the permission of the chair may end the discussion or the session.
Okay. Actually, today we have lost our colleague. You know him. We have lost him due to COVID. Professor Devi Prasad Bhattacharya, retired professor from Kolkata University, and he was my colleague in Ramakrishna Mission Residential College as a chair professor. So he was there in Bangur Hospital. So he has died today. So
I was close to Devida once when I used to travel to Kolkata as a research scholar. So I remember, I have many fond memories with him.
He called me, so maybe his last words with me actually. Okay, so thank you all my paper presenters, all my viewers, audience, and organizers, the committee members, to allow us to give us the privilege or this allow us to have this platform to discuss this much, very in topic rather, that is actually very close to our heart. And in the coming days, the post-COVID time, this will give us food for thinking. So once again, thanking you all for this budding academician, the 4 presenters. Coming days, they will prosper in their life. So thank you all. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, and good night to all of you. And I would specifically like to thank the organizers for allowing such an extended discussion and the session, because this is what we lack. And I'm absolutely elated that we have got such a platform thanks to Team New Literaria.
I sincerely thank Tanmay for like inviting me to this panel and supporting all along, and definitely Team Literaria. Thank you.